This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. There's a lot of interest in citizens' presence commenting tonight, and I was wondering, do we want to move ahead and do the license and permits and get those out of the way? That'll only take a few minutes and then loop back to the comments. Dan and Katie, how do you feel about that? Or do you want to stay with the order that it's listed on the agenda? I'm good with either way.
I'll let you decide.
Yep, however you'd like to decide, Madam Chair.
Okay, I'm not sure if any. Okay, I think since this will only take a few moments, we're going to go and get the licenses and permits out of the way because anybody on the call then would be free to leave. Okay, number one. Okay, we're going to receive an application to amend the officers for the alcohol beverage license held by COT 2150 Hemingway, Point Rowland and Bacchus, Staten Island, New York, as president director, and Gary D. Swearingen, Bellevue, Washington, as assistant secretary. Jeremy, is the application complete and everything set? As you are muted.
You'd think 2 years in, I'd have figured this out, right?
Yeah, you usually pipe up, and I was like,
I was talking, for what it's worth. No issues here. It's just a change of leadership in the business, so everything is good to go as far as the backgrounds.
Thank you.
Given that, I will move. Oh, sorry, Dan. Yep.
No,
I will
that's
second.
okay, Katie. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Application for a combination Class B beer and Class B liquor quota license for Mediterranean Grill Incorporated, doing business as Kaza Mediterranean Kitchen, 1900 Cayuga Street, number 105, Muhammad Hinawi, Madison, as Wisconsin agent.
And just in conversation with Lori, we thought that was related to Madison Mediterranean. It's actually misspelled on the application. She did confirm it is Mediterranean.
Okay.
So I wanted to make that note. That noted, no issues with the backgrounds on that one either.
And move approval.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carried. Okay, we're going to do number 3 and 4 together. Number 3, application for special event permit for Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, Lisa Furo, contact person for the 2022 Great Strides on May 14, 2022 at Fireman's Park. And number 4, the application for an outdoor amplified sound permit for Lisa Furo for Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, 400 South Executive Drive, Suite 109, Brooklyn, Wisconsin, for speeches and announcements and DJ 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. May 14, 2022 for the 2022 Great Strides.
I'll turn that one over to Laura here.
Yeah, so Lisa wasn't able to join tonight, but it's fairly similar to previous years. It is just a smaller group and it's a walk, so they do stick to the sidewalks. We're just finalizing the exact locations of their volunteers, but other than that, like I said, it's similar to previous years.
Okay.
I don't have any questions or comments or concerns, so I will move approval for both the amplified sound permit and the special event permit for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation walk.
I'll second that.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion's carried for the special event permit and outdoor amplified sound for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation Great Strides Walk. Number 5, application for a special event permit by Girls on the Run, Christine Benedict, contact person for 2022 Girls on the Run 5K, and on June 4th, 2022 at Middleton High School, Breitenbach Stadium.
This one again is an annual. They are actually going back to a route that they did in 2017. still working out the exact details of that. Sean with Streets is hopefully going to be able to confirm a traffic control plan with them, because they are planning to shut down Park Street for part of their run. But other than that, I think it is fairly similar to 2017, and they're already in communications with the high school, as that's where it starts and stops.
All right.
I'll make a move to approve with the contingency that they figure out the traffic with Sean.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, then we will go back to the comments from citizens present. If you're on Zoom, please raise your hand and I will call on you in the order I see your hand raised. Okay. I have Tyler Emrick. Please identify yourself and your address. And you have 3 minutes to speak.
Hi, I'm Tyler Emrick. I live at 7320 Elmwood Avenue. And I am back here again. I also spoke up at the October meeting regarding chicken keeping. And as I stated in an October meeting, I am a chicken keeper who would support a reasonable ordinance for chicken keeping that is in line with the ordinance that we have on the books for dogs and cats. I agree that registering chickens with the city is reasonable, and I frankly can appreciate the proposed requirement to place coops a minimum distance away from neighboring homes or living spaces. But I'm dismayed that we're back here again with an overbearing and overreaching draft ordinance that dives into ticky-tacky items that in no way solve the conceived problem. They do nothing but add excessive red tape and unnecessary language to the city code. At the October meeting, it was stated that there were over 300 calls to the police last year regarding dogs. And I believe there's been 2 complaints regarding chickens in the past year, 3 in the past few years, as far as I can tell. Yet the ordinance for dogs and cats is about 3 paragraphs long in the city code. And here we have a draft ordinance that's 5 pages long for chicken keeping. This draft once again dives into areas that in no way should be legislated by the city. The city shouldn't legislate the size and shape or details of my chicken run or where my chickens can range in my own backyard. The city should not legislate that I give my chickens access to water. These issues are not only demeaning and condescending to chicken keepers, especially the requirement to provide fresh water to my chickens. They have nothing to do with the overall issue of limiting noise and smell to neighboring properties. Can you imagine the pushback if this committee presented an ordinance outlining how people should care for their dogs when it comes to giving them water or food, or how their kennel or doghouse or anything else related to their dogs that they do in their own backyard? There'd be no way this would be moving forward. And then finally, I keep being told that this ordinance is about protecting neighbors from noise and odor. Yet I'm also told that there's ordinances already on the books that address noise and odor that aren't working, chapter 16 and 17. So if this is the case and they're unenforceable, I would suggest that we look at fixing those current ordinances before adding additional ordinances on top of those that do not work. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Next, I have Karenfurlong. Please identify yourself and your address.
Yes, this is Karenfurlong. I'm at 1912 Middleton Street here in Middleton. So first of all, I'll state that I oppose the ordinance because I regard it as unnecessary. And I've got a few statistics here that I would like to make into the minutes, if at all possible. And Captain Geisler, I'm happy to send them to you or repeat if needed. But the city of Middleton has 21,827 residents by the last census. We've got 10,509 dwellings. And as Tyler just mentioned, we've had 2 complaints from households about backyard chickens, whereas we've had hundreds about dogs, and Captain Geisler acknowledged that in the October discussion on this topic as well. So we've got less than 0.02% of households with an issue here. And really, I think if we dig into it, this is less of a chicken issue and more of a neighbor dispute issue. So really, are we going to ask our building inspector, and I see Jim is on here as well. Are we going, dogs barking. I hear that. But are we going to ask Jim, our building inspector, to become a counselor and a mediator and a peacekeeper? Surely I don't think that's in his job description, and I'm not sure that maybe that's, you can weigh in, Jim, is that something you want to do? So I think the ordinance is just the wrong tool for the job in hand. And it's been raised in the prior discussion around the issue of people enjoying their backyards. That's been raised. Well, I live here in downtown Middleton, and there are plenty of things that impinge upon my enjoyment of my backyard, right? Dogs barking, and in fact, it's not just in my backyard, they wake me up at night. An 18-wheeler masquerading as a delivery van that rolls past my house every day on residential streets. Not to mention the 21,000 vehicles speeding down University Avenue. Okay, so we have all of these other things, but I recognize that I live in close proximity with other people, and that involves a certain amount of tolerance and some give and take. So for example, one of my neighbors has a hog, not the porcine kind, but the steel kind that are manufactured in Milwaukee. And I personally find Harley Davidsons noisy and smelly, yet I recognize his right to have that hobby and drive his motorcycle. He recognizes, you know, my hens. He enjoys the eggs I share with them. And I went and checked with my neighbors. None of them had any issues with my chickens, but if there was any noise issues, they all mentioned dogs. We have a dog as well. So I'm just like, let's be reasonable here around what we're asking people to do. So on the whole, I think the issue about people enjoying their backyards, let's look at the statistics first off that we're talking about. Let's acknowledge that there has to be some give and take on that. I, for one, am one of the chicken keepers who would probably have to give up our hens if this ordinance passes because we have a small lot, while there's no issues from any of my neighbors around me. As has been discussed before.
Karen, please, 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Edgar Spalding, please identify yourself and the address.
Hello, my name's, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Edgar.
Okay, thank you. I'm Edgar Spalding. We live at 7417 South Avenue. We've had chickens for many years, and we've never had a complaint. Tyler and Kieran made all the points I would like to second because they're right and appropriate. One take I would add on to it is that the magnitude of the problem is far out of proportion with the magnitude of the imposition that the ordinance takes. It's like a bazooka aimed at a mosquito. And good public policy has a match between those two things. This is an unbalanced match, therefore not good public policy. I have offered in the past versions of this alternative that I'd like to say now. We should set up an information collecting mechanism at the city, an email address, cluck@middleton.wis.whatever. And all the chicken owners here, we're a good group. We know each other. We have an organization. We notify our neighbors of this mechanism for collecting information. We ask our neighbors to report any problems that they have with our backyard chickens to this system. And we run this for the remainder of this year. Let's say we go to the winter time. Then we look at what we've collected over this year, and we see what kind of problems have been reported. And then we sit down and design a set of stipulation or a set of rules or regulations that address the real problems that have been collected by this mechanism. Because right now, this ordinance is aimed at imaginary problems. Here in statistics point that out. They are, in some cases, really are neighborhood disputes that the same complaints would exist if the chickens were rubber. A rubber chicken would get the same complaints. And we know this because a group of us have been trying to be helpful in resolving any problems using our experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar. The next, Hans Hilbert, please identify yourself.
Thank you, Kathy. Hans Hilbert, 3209 Cedar Trail. And thanks to Kathy and Katie and Dan for your time on this in meetings as well as out, answering questions as well as staff. But I see the chicken ordinance that's being proposed not as a solution to the problem before us. My understanding with talking to you, Kathy, is that the real problem is a broken Chapter 17 dealing with nuisances in the city. That ordinance, if properly enforced, deals with everything that is trying to be accomplished here from what I understand. And if there is going to be an ordinance that regulates land use, I'd certainly appreciate that it be done through what the state's provided in the zoning code to do that. So it's afforded with the rights that come along with land ownership and land uses. Well, I did provide the three members with a lengthy list, regardless of what you do with this ordinance, a list of issues I have with the ordinance. Some are grammatical corrections, other are numbering of the sections, and other are suggestion for changes. So you each have that, and I'm just want to say I'm happy to answer any questions as you work through the ordinance. But I just want to share that this past summer, I had some neighbor kids over who live in an apartment complex nearby, and they wanted to see the chickens. And one is 15 years old, and he looked at me and he said, I just never thought I would live somewhere where I could go down the street and there would be chickens. And he just thought that that was the greatest thing. And I think that really represents Middleton's history as a community and how we've progressed and how we've kept some of our agricultural roots that are really seated in this area, especially Dane County, one of the best producing agricultural regions in the entire state. And we've been able to develop as an urban area, yet hang on to that connection to the land and what it can provide to us and what that means for our livelihood. So I think overall, this ordinance is overreaching. There's other ways to deal with the complaints and nuisances, and those should be fixed in the system rather than creating additional regulations for people, for the most part, that are doing what's expected of us as a community. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans. Next is Alan Kinlan.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, my name's Alan Koskell, and I live at 7211 Elmwood Avenue. My wife and I have been here 18 years. We've been keeping chicken for 10, and I want to make myself available to this conversation because I'm one of the two people that the complaints are directed at. And I just want to be known that I'm coming to this. I would like to engage in this. I'll help however I can. But up to this point, I've not heard any complaints for years, nor has anybody reached out to me to actually work with me on this. I came prepared with a whole background of how everything has gone for these 10 years. Generally, it's been pretty good. And then it kind of became a zero tolerance situation. And regardless, I keep trying to resolve these things. I stopped letting my chickens out to forage for greens. I gave away my little daughter's favorite chicken to a farm. Unfortunately, we did get a sex-linked chick, which are like, chances are really rare that they turn out to be male, but we had one, took care of it the same day. There was things brought up in the last license and ordinance meeting that I had never heard before. So I ran outside yet that weekend, added a sound baffle to my roof above the hen house. Hopefully that would help with any sound things. I checked my compost, asked my other neighbors if there's any problems that they had. And like, it's unrelated to chickens. That's my children's chore. Like if there's a problem with my compost, just let me know. I'll teach my kids how to do a better job next time. these draft ordinances seemingly by design, like specifically target me and essentially like ban me from keeping chickens. And it's going to affect other chicken keepers, and it transfers all the power away from us property owners and puts absolute power into the hands of our neighbors. They don't have to cite anything beyond subjective aesthetics, and it fails to lay out any concrete objective parameters that would ensure legal chicken keeping. As I plan for the future of my property, how do I comply? Do I add more sound baffles, turn the roof around, move the coop closer to a different neighbor, cut down trees, tear out driveway, tear down my garage? Like, there's still no clarity how any of these will be good enough. I guess in general, I just want to make sure that citizens are fairly and equally represented, conversations are facilitated, we're protected from overreach, seek the guidance of the sustainability committee, and just consider that the majority of citizens are keeping chickens well, support people chicken keeping. We're here to help. We want to make things better, and just don't let two unreasonable, intolerant aggressors dominate this conversation. Thank you.
Mark Campy, please identify yourself and your address.
Hi, my name is Mark Campy. I live at 6905 Whittlesey Road. I've been a chicken owner for approximately 6 years now. I consider myself a responsible chicken owner. Before I even considered putting a coop up, I did talk to all my adjoining neighbors. None of them seem to have a problem with it. Place the coop in a spot where it provide the least impact to any of the neighbors. It's behind some tall arborvitaes near the rear property line to eliminate or limit any possible noise and smell. Our neighbors are very willing and eager to help take care of our chickens when we're out of town or out late some night, make sure that they're put away for the night. They're very willing to help out with that. And of course, they appreciate having some eggs too from that. So I talked to my alder twice recently regarding the whole chicken ordinance situation. And again, she reiterated there's only been a couple of complaints within the city. So I, like many of the others who have already spoken, feel that it's not right to penalize all the chicken owners within the city, but rather you should be dealing directly with the particular problems at hand, which seem to be more of a neighbor dispute than actually a irresponsible chicken owner. Couple of points I don't necessarily agree with, that the chickens themselves attract predators such as raccoons and possums. In all the years that we've had our chickens, we've had one raccoon take a look into our chicken coop. We have foxes running through our yard, which many others do as well. They don't seem to even look at our chickens. I've never had anything try to dig to get into our coop. What they are attracted to seems to be birdseed. Birdseed seems to be more of a problem with predators within the city. And we've had raccoons, they like to go after the jelly, the birdseed and so forth. So do we need to start looking at the number of bird feeders people can have in the city? Because there's an attraction there for predators. Overall, I just feel that the ordinance is a little bit over restrictive. I don't necessarily disagree that there should be some best practices and guidelines put in place to make sure that chicken owners are responsible and taking care of their chickens properly. I just feel that there's more important issues that the city should be looking at rather than looking at the backyard chicken keepers. As others have said, a lot of dog complaints, a lot of cat complaints. In fact, I had a cat go right through my yard last night, picked it up on our camera.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sorry, that's your time.
Sure, thank you.
We do have a lot of people on waiting to go. So the next we have is Sarah Probasco. Please state your name and your address.
Sarah Probasco, 6901 Brookdale Drive. And I'll just keep this short, but I do not support the chicken ordinance. The issues that the proposed ordinance is trying to address, like the animal waste disposal, animals running at large, and the noise problems are already covered under the nuisance ordinance. And so any issues with specific residents can be dealt with through the nuisance ordinance instead of burdening the responsible chicken owners. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Marnie Ginsburg, please state your name and address, please.
Hi, thank you, Kathy. My name is Marnie Ginsburg. I reside at 7101 Franklin Avenue, Middleton. And I am here to comment on the fact that I oppose the stated ordinance as given and would potentially be in order of a reasonable ordinance. However, I feel that many of the issues could be handled under the nuisance complaint. As many of the people before me have said, it's based on a few neighbor concerns, and the excessive restrictions within the ordinance are unnecessary, it would appear. I guess I have a general question about just the democratic process in general of how this ordinance is being created. I know that the elected officials put the ordinance together, and then on the community's behalf and urging, there was some community input sought and given, and some of those, a lot of that feedback wasn't necessarily taken. And then again, this ordinance has continued to be pushed forward. So I guess I have some general concerns about the democratic process throughout all of this, and the ability of our elected officials and the people who are in charge of our city being able to represent the general, the majority of their constituents. We have been chicken owners for the past about 8 years, and we've never had any complaints. It's only been a way that we have created community with our neighbors. We've made some good friends just in the neighborhood because they were walking by and somehow we started a conversation about chickens. So I think they're a huge asset to our community. We've never had any issues with excessive noise. However, I would agree that like dogs have been an issue. Actually exactly a year ago, a neighbor's dog got out of their yard. He dug through underneath their fence and ran right through our house. It was last March, and he had muddy paws. And so I think that there are other concerns other than just chickens. But on the on a large scale, I think overall the city has other concerns that may be more pressing than continuing to bring up this chicken ordinance. And I know that you get an inordinate amount of comments and feedback, and I know these meetings run longer because there are many advocates for chickens. So I would just urge the city to consider using either the nuisance complaint or really considering a more reasonable ordinance with dealing with this chicken issue. Thank you so much all for your time.
Thank you, Marnie. Next up is Debbie Gaffney-Dilly.
Hi, my name is Debbie Gaffney-Dilly. I live at 5405 Jonquil Court in Middleton. I have been a backyard chicken keeper for a little over 10 years here. And I must say, I've never had a complaint from any of my neighbors at all from the backyard chickens that I've kept. What I've done is I've kept an open communication with all of my neighbors here in my subdivision. And prior to putting the chickens in my backyard at a neighborhood picnic, I discussed this with all of them before I placed them there. And they were very supportive. And I've had an open backyard policy too. I find my neighbors in my backyards, viewing my chickens, looking at my coop, and I've spent a considerable amount of time explaining what the chickens are. I've shared the eggs with them. I've also employed some of the neighborhood kids in that to take care of the chickens when I have been out of town too, and they've done an exceptional job. I don't want to repeat anything that has already been said. I support wholly my chicken keepers that have spoken here and everything that they have to say. I do feel that this ordinance is excessive, and I would not want to see it passed as it is right now. So thank you for having these few minutes here to state my opinion. Okay.
Thank you, Debbie. Next, we have Dr. Chris Hunter-Skeens.
Hi, I'm Dr. Cassandra Skeens. I'm a retired veterinarian and a backyard bird keeper. I feel rather privileged that in reaching out to government to comment on this ordinance, I've been able to spend a lot of wonderful time on the phone with Alderman Olson, and I really felt like we were making, some progress. At this point, the first iteration of this ordinance was clearly written by non-chicken people. The second was almost worse in some ways. And then after many months of please let's get a chicken group together to rewrite this, come to common terms. We did that about a month ago, 4 of us and Jim and Kathy, and it was very clear. We were very clear to, lucky to be able to distill this down to what are the concerns. The concerns are noise and odor. And the statement was, your hobby ends where my lot line begins. There is very zero tolerance for noise and odor. And the claim that the noise nuisance ordinances do not protect against this, my personal feeling is they do not protect against it because the nuisance ordinances require that you be annoying neighbors, not neighbor. And there are clearly places where there are neighbor conflicts that don't have to do with chicken. In the rewriting, when creating this third draft that wasn't seen, we were able to have left off some of the irrelevancies, like a chicken coop being 16 inches off the ground is really not relevant to the law. Take out negative and unproven claims such as chickens attract vermin and predators. Milton has predators already. We clarified definitions of words like chicken coop to be a place where chickens can rest and lay eggs, and that got changed back. We tried to insert, we knew we needed to insert some grandfathering language. We agreed about chicken coops being 25 feet from lot lines. There were so many things that we were able to take out and put in things with the goal of being prosecutable for noise and odor. And I really thought we came close. There were a couple numbers at the end, but then this version came out, which has been recrafted, a lot of stuff re-admitted. And I think if you want to know how much this doesn't do, is the line in section 4, nor does compliance with this section preclude a finding that a private or public nuisance exists. If you comply as a chicken owner fully with this ordinance, we can still prosecute you. It gives no protections to chicken owners. It gives a lot of power to neighbors if they don't like me. And I really think that the citizens deserve a chance to make this a good chicken ordinance. Right now, what we have is an ordinance to restrict the keeping of chickens.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Okay. Next, we have Heidi Reese.
Yes, Rest, like dress without the D.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. So I live at 7201 Maywood Avenue. We have a coop of silky chickens. Silkies are bantams, which are much smaller than standard fowl. I've spoken a couple times to Katie Nelson, and I've also sent a communication to Dan Ramsey. I used to live in his neighborhood for a number of years. We've currently been in we've been in our neighborhood approximately 2 years, and we've had chickens for almost that same amount of time. So one of the things that we were really excited about in moving into this neighborhood were the larger lot sizes and the ability to keep chickens. It's been a great experience for my family. I would like to reiterate that it has actually created community in our neighborhood. There's a running joke that we're the family that owns the cat chickens because silkies have fuzzy feathers rather than kind of your standard. So we get a lot of conversation with people stopping over, asking questions. Our neighbor has nieces and nephews who, when I was building our chicken coop and run, had a lot of questions. Weren't scared of the chickens, were really interested. So I think it's just been a really educational experience for neighbors as well as folks who are just strolling by and want to ask questions. So I think there's some things in the chicken ordinance that are overreaching. I think not everything in there number-wise is best practice, and I very much do appreciate, though, some of the changes that have been made. I was very concerned previously about the proximity to a lot, line. My coop and run are approximately 5 feet from the fence. I was told it needed to be at least 2, so I wanted to clearly, increase that. I'm easily greater than 25 feet away though from any neighboring building. So I appreciate that was the lot line or the lot line was excluded. I'm also appreciative of a number of the pieces about coops being off the ground. You know, the size of the coop and run. I still disagree with the minimum square footage per chicken in the coop. Again, this is because I raise bantams, which are much smaller birds. But again, I think this is much better than versions 1 and 2. I still do think there are some pieces in here that could be better. So I oppose the current version, but would look forward to working with the city on revising this. Even though I've only had chickens a couple of years, I've done a lot of research, and I think I have a lot of really good information that I could share and would be more than happy to do so. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Heidi. Appreciate your comments. Last, we have a responsible chicken keeper. Please identify your name and address, please, for the record.
My name is Maria Huckleberry. I live at 5319 South Ridgeway. I'd like to basically reiterate a lot of things that people have said in the fact of the democratic system, and with everything going on with diversity, equity, inclusion, it sounds like none of that was really accomplished. And even possibly for this new third revision, that there was not equity or inclusion for anybody that has chickens. I also am concerned because noise and odor varies from person to person. So it should stay under the nuisance ordinance. And how do you enforce something like that when it's person to person? Someone that smells something strong may not smell it strong from someone else. So that would be a very difficult thing to enforce. And I wanted to say, obviously, I disagree with this ordinance, and it should be just everything should go under the nuisance ordinance. That's what a nuisance ordinance is about. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Appreciate it. Anyone else want to address the committee? I don't see any other hands. Anybody on the phone that wants any phone people? Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion of the meeting. See if I can find that again. Okay. That brings us to the approval of the minutes from the February 8th, 2022 meeting.
Move approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The minutes are approved. This brings us to an ordinance to permit the keeping of chickens. This was first before us on October 12th, 2021. And I can just give a little background on where we've been with this. After the first meeting, I met with 2 chicken keepers that wanted to help mediate the issues that were happening within the city. They found that this wasn't something that they could mediate. And it just kind of, we gave them 3 full months that they worked on that. And there was no, I don't know if we want, Jeremy, usually we turn the comments off on these meetings because they have to be part of public record and capture them. Well, when this is where this all started is last summer, I got 3 complaints from chicken owners all at the same time. It's very unusual to get 3 complaints and have them all about the same thing in the same district. It just was very unusual. And I was on the sustainability committee when this was first discussed, as whether we wanted to put more parameters and more limitations on chicken keeping, or do we just want to let it leave what's currently in the ordinance and let, if anything would happen, then the nuisance ordinance would handle it. And that was what the sustainability committee said, well, fine. And what, in hindsight, that shouldn't have been a decision by the sustainability committee. I think that that's something that the council should have discussed as a whole, and it should not just been a decision to just not do anymore. So when this happened, my immediate thought went to, why isn't the nuisance ordinance working like I thought it would? And then I thought, hang on a second. Just a second here, I gotta get funded right here. why the nuisance ordinance wasn't working, why these couldn't be resolved, and how is it that we have codes that allow chicken coops to be placed within several feet of someone's home? To me, that didn't make sense. And I wanted to find out why that was. And I come to find out, like, the nuisance ordinance, and when the police have it, it's more of a chronic, and then correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, but you deal mostly with the chronic nuisance complaints, and there's a code that's written more specifically for things that you have to deal with. And Jim, you're on the call, and what I understand is you're more about the enforcement of codes, and the nuisance ordinance doesn't really fall under the realm of your enforcement duties. And this confuses me greatly. So,
Kathy, I don't know, maybe I can shed a little light on really what that, this is not and has not been an issue of the nuisance ordinance is not working per se. The thing that makes them somewhat difficult, and in particular in the cases we were dealing with, is, if it's sometimes hard to untangle what is really just a neighbor dispute and what may also be real elements of noise, odor, and things like that. Because, particularly with noise, unless you do have multiple neighbors or situation where it's affecting multiple neighbors, you usually have to get city staff or some other people there to observe things when it is happening. We get recordings, but I mean, that really is not a very effective way to demonstrate the actual impact. It can maybe demonstrate, crowing is happening at a certain time and things, but, unless you are there when it happens, they're just much more difficult to prove than it may seem on its face. And then, like I said, when you do mix in the fact that you've got neighbor dispute things going on, it challenges the credibility of either witnesses in there, and like I said, it's on its face it seems like they should be very easy to prosecute, but again they're difficult, and that's why in particular one of the instances we were looking at, we thought for a long time that a good chunk of the issues would be resolved if the chickens weren't located right basically in an echo chamber right next to somebody's house. But we didn't have a direct mechanism to get that located. And so part of this was an attempt to simply have some objective standards that aren't based upon whenever somebody gets there and having to have multiple witnesses describe what are, the reasonable person standard for nuisances is strictly speaking an objective test, but it is still some degree of subjectivity, and having to explain that is much more difficult than going in and saying, your coop is within 20 feet of somebody's house, it needs to be here. And that addresses also why we are not just throwing away the nuisance aspects of this. And the idea that, for instance, it goes way back in zoning codes. For instance, compliance with the zoning code does not necessarily mean that some circumstance doesn't arise where a nuisance does still exist. And compliance with zoning codes are not a defense to nuisance actions. Now, there aren't too many nuisance actions that arise when you comply with the code, and that's the hope. But that's why we reserve those things. So, like I said, it just became a much more complicated thing to deal with than it would seem on the surface, and that was the goal for creating at least some objective standards that we would hope would keep a lot of the nuisance stuff from happening. But time is only going to tell, I guess, how effective this ultimately will be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the other thing I wanted to, when this all happened, it made me think, why do other communities in Dane County, they have chicken ordinances that are created to address these problems, and we didn't? And I was under the impression that the nuisance ordinance would address it. And that was what started me thinking, like, what's missing here in Middleton that we could improve upon. I don't know, Jim, do you want to weigh in on any of this so far, or Matt, you want? One thing before we were talking about that we spent a lot of time working on carving up the ordinance and coming up with different verbiages, and I wanted to make sure that they felt that we are giving consideration to all the things that they asked for. And Matt, I just want to loop back to you and some of the things that were accepted in and some that were discarded. And would this be a good time to start doing that, or do we want to?
Well, I don't know if we want to go through them bit by bit, but I did look at all the comments. I know that there were some things I didn't incorporate. Basically, in most instances, the decision I made with respect to, change it or not, or we had some changes that were requested, and we, conferenced about them, and we just felt that, that overall, it was going to create a bigger issue than we were resolving. Certain verbiages I looked at, in a couple instances, in my opinion, I think the proposed verbiage where I certainly understood sort of the tone and everything that was kind of intended by it, but I felt it created a little bit more ambiguity and actually potentially created narrower definitions than what I was intending for the ordinance. And so that's why, I left them as is.
The chicken run was an example of that, where they wanted to strike the chicken run, but we wanted to allow the chickens to have the backyard considered a chicken run if it's fenced. And it was just in how the wording needed to be crafted. So that's why the chicken run part of it remained in here. But the chicken run is now defined as, so it could be the whole backyard, but you have to be able to, the chickens have to be able to access the coop also. I mean, they can't be excluded from the coop. One of the questions was brought up of why do we need water in here? We don't do it for pets. And that's all state regulated. It's, if I understand it, there's state humane treatment of animals. And that's why you don't have to have a lot of extra code relisted in your local codes. And I was, and the number, one thing that was included, it was the square footage for each chicken kept. These were, I think, Matt would correct me if I'm wrong, these are what you were hoping to for the best treatment of the animals and the chicken runs at 10 feet.
Right. Well, that was within, we consulted a number of different sources. It is in part for, humane, but I understand space and everything. It affects chicken behavior and, in particular with the density of chickens and how we change the chicken coop so we could, or the chicken run, so we could allow if somebody just had a fence around their entire backyard, provided, we felt that, if you have a lot of space, you're not going to get a concentration of them making a lot of noise and therefore spread it out. And that was that density issue is also something we were trying to play with. So that's why we're able to relax, if you have, a very low density of chickens because you're using the whole or a very large portion of your backyard, it seemed less important to have any setbacks for the chicken run area. So, most people's yards under this, if you've got your whole yard fenced in, you can have a chicken run everywhere, and that does not have to be set back. So it's, serving sort of two purposes, but.
Yeah. And also there's some, these are major changes in I don't think it was ever anyone's intent that the chickens would be killed, but this has finally got it spelled out in here, because this is like the second time we've ever gotten the chance to talk about it. Existing chickens over the number permitted in this ordinance may be kept until the total number is reduced by attrition or rehoming. That it's always, no chickens will be killed. In this ordinance, most communities, they limit at 4, period. This one has up to 10 chickens, and I've never seen up to 10 in any other. I can't recall seeing it in any other communities. There's a lot of communities that keep the coops and chickens contained in coops and runs. This one allows them to go free. The setbacks are only 2 feet. And actually the initial fee, and Jim can correct me if this is wrong, this includes the zoning and building permits, but if they were already paid when you put your coop up, that will be waived because that's already on file, and you would only pay the chicken permit fee. And I know that Hans was trying to help me with that, trying to figure out where permits and licenses and all that is, but it's a little more, I don't know how that all shakes out. But if they were never permitted, then it would be required. So that's how it goes. Jim, do you want to add anything?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. We work with that on the, I do have some permits on file for people that followed the zoning and the permit requirements for their existing coops or for their coops when they put them up. And if I have a record of that and it's on the, we keep all the site plans. I've got them. I found them back to the 80s and 90s in the files. If we have those files or you have the approvals from when you did it, great. We can waive those original permit fees and just work with a renewal at that point. But if we did not follow the site plan and the zoning and the requirements for a coop, which is identical to a shed on your property, it's an accessory building on your property, then we would need to follow the parameters set forth that's no different than we currently have. Zoning, site plan review, and a building permit.
Thank you, Jim. Dan, Katie, do you have any questions?
I have a ton. Let Dan go first.
Yeah, question for Jim. So Jim, the construction of a chicken coop is, and for the zoning and the building permit, that is essentially the same as building a shed?
Yes, we adopt the building code for any accessory building or structures on the lots. So I do know that there are some chicken owners that applied for a permit for a shed, their coop, followed all the steps, paid the $65, and we issued them a permit. I came out to make sure it was located where the site plan said it was located. Same thing I do with a shed. Now I don't go in as it framed with 2x4s or 2x6s. I'm basically looking to make sure it's placed on the lot where they said it was, and it's roughly the same size as what they indicated it was going to be.
Okay.
Is that the same for beehives?
I have never seen a permit in Middleton for beehives. When I was in Madison, yes, we have a beehive permit in the city of Madison. But I do not know of one in Middleton since I've been here for the 2 years I've been here.
Kathy, I have a question for you. When you were on sustainability, and do you remember when that was? Do you remember how long ago that was?
It's been a long time because I know Abby was chairing it yet. And I don't believe she was the director of planning yet. So like 9-10 years ago. It's been a while.
Is there any record of how many complaints we've had for chickens in 10 years?
I don't know.
Officer.
Go ahead, Jim.
Jim, you're not.
You sound like a banjo, Jim.
Community service, the records are not.
It's okay. You know what?
You're
having technical difficulties, and I was asking Officer Jeremy Geisler.
So one of the issues with the numbers for animal complaints is that it's not broken down by animal. We switched, and I know I had provided this information to Kathy a while back. We switched CAD systems, computer-aided dispatch systems, We no longer have control, the county does, over what those titles are. So there's like 5 different titles for animal complaints. And that could go anywhere from an injured animal on the side of the road that needs to be taken care of, to a barking dog, to a chicken. Now, anecdotally speaking, not a high number that the police department gets involved in. I know Jim and the building inspection have been more heavily involved in this issue because it more falls in their lane, I guess, than the police department. Now, I would add that, of course, the issues that spilled over as far as the neighbor issues have been dealt with by the police department.
Okay. I have those numbers if you're interested, Katie. I'll just read
Yeah, I would.
Animal for general stray. I think these were numbers for last year, Jeremy. Yeah. Animals general stray was 198. Animal found 57. Animal loss 21. Animal bite 30. Animal disturbance 24. Animal barking 26.
But that was just 1 year, and that's just last year, and that's not. The chicken one we know is, you said 3 complaints, right?
Right. And also, I think this is an important differentiation. And we heard about how many houses and everything. And I was trying to find out what % of households have, let's say, dogs. And through the American Veterinary Medical Association, 38% does. So in Middleton, we could have as many as 5,500 dogs, is what it says. But based on the information I found from the Department of Agriculture, or DHS, whatever, they think it's 1% of urban chickens, which if we want to extrapolate out, it could be like 88 chicken flocks in Middleton. I don't know, that sounds like a reasonable number, maybe high, maybe low. But when you have few flocks like that and 3 complaints, it's, you know, it's a high percentage compared to how, if you have that many dogs and the number of complaints for the dogs.
So, I'm having a hard time with that math, but I get you. Matt was talking about chicken, taking care of chickens and putting in water as necessary and cleaning up after it and all that for good chicken behavior. And we don't want to, did I misquote you, Matt? You're tilting your head.
Well, I don't know if the water had anything to do with behavior. I was talking specifically about the numbers per square.
Oh, the density
per square foot in the various.
Because
places.
of best chicken behavior, and yet we're not. Well, I wrote down chicken behavior versus a flock size. If you restrict a flock size too much, then you do get bad chicken behavior, right? I just feel like I just want to make a general. I've got all these different notes, and I love that this community has made this more sustainable than just for the chicken owners. It's something that the city really wanted people to do. And I feel like we're going around. I mean, we wanted to support it, like just like with the bees, we wanted to make it we didn't want to throw up a lot of obstacles to have this happen. And I feel like this is like this weird labyrinth to try to justify these 2 people who had complaints. And I'm sorry that that's the way I feel, but that is the way I feel. I just want one more thing to say. I wanted to explain for Marnie Ginsburg. She had a question about the democratic process. Marnie, this isn't going to be final here. So if we get something, Matt's looking at me like, doesn't it have to go to council for final?
We can always change things.
Yes.
Right, yeah. It's not final in L&O.
No.
Right?
No.
So you get to speak here, Marnie, and then if something's written and it goes to council, you'll get to speak again. And you get to contact.
There's 2 readings.
In the council, there are 2 readings. There's 1, and then it'll come back again. But so I wanted to explain it to Marnie and anyone else who was feeling like, oh my God, like this is it. There is more of a process than tonight. Okay, so I just wanted to make that clear. All right, I'll stop.
Look, Katie, if you have more, don't feel like we're trying to, I want to hear you out.
I feel like the nuisance ordinance, I'd love to have us and L&O dive into the nuisance ordinance and maybe fix it that way.
Well, the problems, the difficulties with the nuisance, or I mean, there might be some little tweaks, but basically the biggest difficulty and why that has not been an effective solution there really just have a lot to do just with the concept of nuisance and proving nuisances and the amount of evidence and everything to go before a municipal court. Those things aren't really fixable. It's the nature of nuisance law to begin with. And it's frankly, those difficulties is why, 100 some years ago, you started having zoning ordinances and these things, just because as we became industrialized and different, living in close proximity and those kind of things. Just plain nuisance law was not really nimble and useful enough to deal with land use conflicts. And that's so it's not something really inherent with our nuisance ordinance that was the problem.
So let me ask a question then, Matt, to Hans Hilbert's point of dealing with this in zoning. Is there is there a way to, because part of what you said, you wrote this ordinance with the setbacks and so on and so forth, was so that there was something that when you went to look to see if there was an issue, you could say, yeah, that the coop is too close to you didn't put it where. Is that something that should be, we're in the middle of a zoning rewrite. Is that something that we should put into our land use zoning? And so it's covered there. And then the nuisance ordinance can actually cover the nuisance part of that, because we've already got it in land use and zoning.
Well, the number one reason why this isn't in the zoning ordinance is because to the extent we have got current coops in locations that are very problematic, if this were purely a zoning ordinance, you would have the right to continue that as a legal non-conforming use under zoning. There are certain coops that we'd want to have moved. Now, in those cases, we could be left, maybe force them to be moved through other means by prosecuting a nuisance action, but it would kind of ultimately defeat one of the purposes for which we did this. But I don't see substantively, I don't see a lot of, other than that, why this would be any more beneficial one way or the other in the zoning ordinance. Frankly, when we talk about process, we've had a lot more input and a lot more public comments. I mean, we've effectively had 3 separate public hearings on this, which is far more than any zoning code is required to have. So yeah, overall, I don't really understand how this is any more beneficial, having gone through and being put in the zoning ordinance versus a separate permit process.
So through the zoning, the coops that could stay as conditional use coops where they are currently, if they are not compliant
legal non-conforming. They're not conditional uses. They're
legal non-conforming.
Yeah. Now some may not be, depending on if they're right on the lot line and things like that. They might be just illegal coops that we've failed to take enforcement action against. But I don't think that's the case for all of them.
And what's the difference between leaving it, if it went through zoning, leaving it as a legal non-conforming versus if we go this route with an ordinance? Are you saying that more of these coops as they exist are going to have to move?
The existing coops that do not comply with this ordinance will have to move by the date we have in the order right now, which is May 31st.
And I guess for me, I would prefer that it go through land use zoning then, because we really just don't have problems with the majority of the coops, correct? I mean, just to have them grandfathered in as legal non-conforming doesn't seem like a problem. I mean, am I wrong?
It just seems like there's a lot of different ways to approach it, so not one way.
Right,
So.
but this was a very conscious choice to do it this way.
I understand.
Kathy, could I ask a question?
Yes,
I
Mayor.
have to go to another meeting. So this is for Matt. So Matt, I read part of this ordinance and I haven't read the whole thing. So I heard that it's pretty long. So if they say you got 5 or 6 or 10 lines for dogs, and so here it looks like it is it's written how to raise chickens rather than the ordinance. This just you probably would know whether that's true or not. But when you say the water, height, all that stuff, that's what it seemed to me. And as I said earlier, I haven't read it, so I probably would read it now. But that seems, I'm sure you will find some way to address it. I see no reason that why the chicken ordinance would have to be any bigger than number one, if it has to be, and then, it's not writing an essay here. Number two, where could I find, for example, if there's a chicken ordinance for Madison, could you send it to me, please? And number 3 is that I heard Kathy say, and the other said there were 3 complaints. And as one of the other persons said here, there are 22,000 people who live in Middleton. And while Kathy gave some example of dogs and chickens as well, there are more dogs than chickens, but 3 complaints, and we have spent so much city time, lawyer time. I'm just a little bit, interested that what's going on here. So anyway, so, Katie and Dan had really good points. So let's find out, what's the best way to handle it. Maybe there are other ways to handle other than the ordinance. And I would really appreciate, Matt, if you could, send me the Madison ordinance and why is it that long compared to the dogs, if you could answer it. And is it wise for the city to spend this kind of a time and effort for 3 complaints?
Well, I would like to address this. I mean, first of all, there are lots of regulations about dogs. The difference is we have most of the regulations right here about chickens because it's a very specific sort of thing. And historically, chicken keeping with respect to, single family urban living has been not common and or otherwise, oftentimes prohibited by zoning codes. I mean, it's a relatively recent phenomenon to try to really encourage it, which is fine, but there's a lot of different things that go along with chickens than aren't necessarily the dogs. Most dogs live inside the house. They aren't kept entirely outside like chickens are. But I mean, more to the point is that there's a whole state statute that is a chapter just on dogs. We've got various little ordinances throughout our code that deal with dogs. They're just not all in one place. Do we have something that specifically says dogs have to have water at all times? No. Well, but that's because that when dogs are inside, a lot of people give their dogs just water at certain times so they don't pee in their homes.
And that is in the state statute.
Right. We do have a keeping of bees. We require the bee owners to have water, and nobody thus far has told me that it's a bad idea to make sure that chickens have water. So I don't think it's entirely helpful or accurate to just compare this piece of paper to any one part of the regulations and things that apply to dogs. There, like I said, one, there are a lot of different regulations. They just happen to be located in a lot of different places. And two, they're just not the same. So.
Matt, could there be something like, here's a link to good chicken care practices? Please, consult this instead of telling people they need to change the water, or like,
Well, it doesn't say they need to change. There's nothing. It doesn't say. We can take it. If people are really bent out of shape, all it says is they should have access to the source of fresh water.
Thank you.
Effectively what it says.
I feel like a bunch of this stuff, if it's really bad, the Humane
Katie, what
Society
areas
can get involved.
Can you tell us what you would like to strike?
Let me get it.
I would say thank you. You guys are doing a great job. People can Google it, how to raise chickens, and have a great meeting. Thank you.
Kathy, this is Susan. I was wondering while Katie's getting her thoughts together, if I could say a few things.
Sure.
Actually, I object on a procedural basis. Susan, you had your opportunity during the public comment and you're not a member of this community.
Oh, but she is.
Sorry, this committee. We had to listen to a very biased,
Karen, you are not
I
part of
muted
this
him.
committee. Enough. I'll take care of this. She is an alder, and we do make special exceptions for alders and mayors. So, Susan, please proceed.
Thank you, Kathy. This is the first time I've listened to all the different issues, and I'm seeing there's two separate things. I agree with Hans. The coop is an outbuilding structure that should be under the zoning conditions or regulations in terms of setbacks from lot lines and so on. So that, I think, needs to be taken care of there. We might want to grandfather in those that are already non-conforming just because they're there. But I think we do need to get in our zoning laws, or at least acknowledge that a chicken coop is a shed and it needs to follow our standard zoning regulations. I'm seeing things like the fresh water should just be left out. It's covered. Anyone that wants to take care of their animals, that's reasonable. Limits on the number of chickens maybe needs to be discussed. We have limits on cats. And so I'm a cat owner. And when we put in the limits on cats, at that time I owned 4. I think we can only have 5. So we need to think of a reasonable limit, but we do limit the numbers. And we might limit the number of dogs. I'm not sure.
We do.
I think we do.
That's what
And
I
that
was.
yeah. I just want, and the number of dogs, if I'm recalling correctly, when that was put in place, it was one complaint about the number of dogs and it was changed. I want to make a comment here that chickens are limited to 4 in the following Dane County communities: Black Earth, Brookland, Madison, Deerfield, Cross Plains, Sun Prairie, and Verona.
Okay.
And that's the max.
Yeah, and what I would say on the nuisance, this is from when I was on L&O, and we get nuisance complaints about all sorts of things. So like when Matt helped me out, I'm blanking on the restaurant that's across the Beltline and just north of, I think it's 14, that had the cars and the motorcycle nights.
Oh,
Quaker Steak.
Oh, yes.
Quaker Steak and Lube. We had to have, our police officers would go out there. And actually, I think, Jeremy, you took me out there one time with the noise meter to see what different decibels. So we've already got in place regulations on how loud the noise can be. And I think that should be sufficient to take care of the noise issue. You know, we don't call, I dislike my next door neighbor who has the professionally mowed lawn that brings the big, huge lawnmowers in for 30 minutes, and I can't sit in my backyard and talk because it's so loud. But I think we've already got some regulations on that in terms of how many decibels it's a problem and how many times. I will say in terms of the dog regulations, there's all sorts of regulations, again, in different places. We require them to be vaccinated against rabies.
Okay.
I think that's probably a state law and so on. So I'm thinking maybe break it into a couple of little things. So definitely the coop and where that goes needs to be regulated, and the run needs to be fenced.
Okay, thank you, Susan. We are running up against a time when Dan has to go to the next meeting, and I really want to hear from Katie and what her thoughts are on that.
I guess I think the two things I'd love to just see taken out are the water and like how often you clean the waste. I get that we don't want it smelling, right?
Right.
But I don't know how you're going to regulate that. I don't know who's going to visit every week to visit all the, you know, coops. And so if we can somehow just put some kind of best practices paragraph, can suggestions suffice?
One thing we talked about is having a city website, and if the chicken owners want to add best practices, who to contact with questions, that kind of thing is what we were hoping we could do. So you want to keep the no less frequently part out of the, Matt, do you have that? Is that okay?
Yeah, well, I've got the ordinance in front of me.
Take the water out. Anything else, Katie?
Is the suggestion to just remove the, well, I smell coops. Should just clean regularly and all waste disposed of in a manner.
Yeah.
So just take out no less frequently than once per week.
Yeah. I feel like we just need to give back some of the power to the owners of the chickens, as was stated a couple of times. It just feels like that the neighbors have more power here. And so, I mean, these people who own chickens, they do care about their animals. So I think that.
Well, I would agree that most of them do, but just to be clear, I mean, most of these things that are in here, I mean, these are standards that apply regardless of whether the neighbor, you know, it's not, I mean, granted, these are typically, we probably won't catch violations unless a neighbor is complaining.
But then isn't the Humane Society brought in on some of that then?
Well,
it's like clear neglect or something.
Yeah, if there's a complaint and we find clear that there might be a humane, but the point being, with the terms of this ordinance, there is nothing in this ordinance that applies or doesn't apply just because a neighbor wants it to or doesn't want it to. So I'm a little bit, I guess I don't quite understand about the giving of neighbors power.
Well, like if someone can say like your chickens stink, I'm gonna make sure you can't have them anymore.
Right, and then
that's our existing ordinance. That's a nuisance, and it just depends. It just means that it may be harder to prosecute for the evidentiary stand, but that's not new. That's the problem that happens is that it takes an extraordinary amount of time, often for, and maybe not so much with odors if they're present all the time, but you know, if somebody cleans something up before a city or Jim or officers are able to go and see something, you don't see when that happens. And so, you know, objective standards, that's why they exist. But
yeah, I guess I guess in the bottom line for me is I'd like to see it go under the zoning code instead of an ordinance. And I think it was stated at some point, I think, Matt, you were worrying about at some part of this that you were creating more problems than you resolved. And if we can make some of these, what did you call it, existing non-compliant buildings, and they can be where they are, and we can bring our chicken numbers down based on attrition.
Well, like I said, I mean, I'll come around and say,
a way to do this so that everybody can be on board.
One of the major reasons why we did this in a separate ordinance was to where we have, you know, we've kind of decided that chicken coops should not be as close as some of these chicken coops are to houses. And if there's at least one instance in particular, if we put this in the zoning code, in my opinion, we've sort of kneecapped ourselves and taken away a large reason why we've even drafted this ordinance.
Kathy, what's the, or Matt, what is the existing placement for Madison?
They are requiring 25 feet from the adjoining.
So
property.
as you have written it, as the new draft as written.
For Madison or Middleton?
Mm-hmm. Madison.
What Madison has is the 25 feet from adjacent property homes is 25 feet in Madison. And it's also that, okay, just so it's 25 feet in Brooklyn, Madison, Edgerton, Stoughton, and then the rest of them go with the how far back from the lot line. And that is 15 for Verona and Sun Prairie.
Is that because places like Brooklyn and Evansville have bigger lots because they're a little bit less urban?
Madison isn't. Madison would be, I think that's why they have sale out 6 birds, but I don't know if, but Madison is 25 feet and that's not necessarily,
okay.
I just want to ask Jeremy a question. The next, our agenda item, is that something we're going to be able to, are they present at the meeting?
It looks like he is present, yes.
Okay.
Should I move that we defer to the next meeting?
I would prefer we move this to council so that we can discuss it there as a group to find out how we want to handle this. Because I think that this is a bigger, you know, this is a conversation that, as I said before, I think this is always something that should have been discussed at the council level. And
so why don't we move to refer it to council without a recommendation?
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion? I think that this will be, it's something that we need to really look deeper at. So I appreciate all your work on this, Matt and Jim. And any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of moving this to council for further discussion without recommendation? Please signify by saying
aye.
Aye. Okay. The next item on the agenda reports a report on events happening at the Bristol Board Saloon and Grill, 2611 Branch Street.
Looks like Mr. Lyshak was here if he wants to. Oh, there he is.
Yep, that's me. Yep.
All right.
Can you hear me?
So,
I've never done this before, so.
Yep, we can hear you. You're good to go there. So I shared with, it had been brought to my attention by our third shift officers, a couple of incidents. One does not make a trend, obviously, but there was one back in October where there was a fight, and one of the bartenders there ended up actually pepper spraying a patron. That wasn't necessarily the issue. The bartender was not cited or anything for that. But one of the issues is that that person had been asked to leave, did not, was cut off, still didn't leave. And then it escalated obviously very quickly to the point where there was a physical altercation, pepper spraying. So the issue there is not reporting to the police. The February, and that, I'm sorry if I didn't say that, was October 17th of 2021. On February 6th of this year, officers were sent to a fight at the Bristol Boar, where the bar staff was aware of it, but it hadn't been reported for 14 minutes until after one of the patrons, actually one of the involved parties, called us. And that another issue is that was brought up by one of the officers, is that a bartender was armed with a knife. There was an allegation that was displayed. A video showed that it was not displayed, but it was in his pocket or on his pocket. And then Mr. Lyshak was found to be very intoxicated inside the office there. So those are brought to L&O here, and Alder Olson asked that Mr. Lyshak be brought before the committee to discuss these issues.
Right.
Is there any questions or?
Yeah, well, the concern is that this has happened, and what have you implemented to prevent this from happening again, so the police don't have to come out? What steps are you taking to correct this?
Well, the first incident, the one with the pepper spray, it did take place very, very quickly. And it was actually, we had already given last call, had our lights all up in the bar, and the person went crazy very quickly. And the bartender did pepper spray. I was very surprised that the bartender didn't realize it was pepper spray. It was pepper spray I had picked up in 2020 when all the riots were going on, and I had some concerns about safety down at the bar. And that's how that, I was quite aghast actually that she did feel threatened, and I understood that, but I did think she overreacted in that instance. And actually that bartender doesn't work at my bar anymore. But as regards to the calling the police, again, it was something that happened so quickly. I mean, the police ended up getting called while we were trying to defuse it. I was actually there at that time, and was trying to pull people away and diffuse it. I would say that is what you're seeing occurring and when we're having incidents where there actually are people that are being excessively belligerent, and your time is going to trying to keep the people separated, and that's are the occasions when the police are not called. Because before, and after both of these incidents, I mean, we have called the police on numerous occasions. I mean, for any number of incidences. I mean, off the top of my head, I had a girl that was dancing at a table. We called the police to, get rid of her. We had a guy who attacked me with a knife at the front door. We called the police, to get rid of him. We had another person that was going table to table. We called the police, to get rid of him. I would say that, in my opinion, and these are outliers, and the reason they even exist is just because the staff was taken up with trying to separate people at the time and prevent things from escalating further, that they didn't, have time to actually even grab a phone and call, just because you're trying to keep people apart and keep them from attacking each other. I mean, that because we have proven on many, many occasions in the last months, like I said, before, during, and after these incidences, we do call the police very regularly. And I would also like to, make the point is I talk to my beat officers on a nightly basis, asking them, inviting them as often as possible, actually, to do walkthroughs on my bar on, Friday, Saturday nights. I do not have any kind of policy. It's the opposite of that. I have a policy to try to bring the police in as often and as quickly as possible. And I really view these two incidences as outliers and they're not random outliers. There actually is a reason it's that there was a significant altercation that the staff was trying to prevent from, getting worse, where people would have, started swinging or attacking each other if we didn't get them separated.
I guess my question is, I'm more concerned about incident number 2. Were you the responsible person on duty the evening that there was a fight, and you were found sleeping in your chair intoxicated? Were you on duty that night?
No, I didn't do any bartending. I didn't do anything. Actually, that day, normally I'm there 7 nights a week, making sure things are going smoothly. That day, I happened to come across one of my patrons couldn't go to a basketball game. It was really good tickets. At a Badger game, I took off one night, went down there, and yes, I drank too much. Again, the night before, I probably slept 5 hours like usual because I'm up till 3 in the morning. Then I open the place up, and then I'm usually go home, take a nap. But that day, someone offered me some tickets. I contacted some friends. We went to the game, and yes, I did go out drinking, that night and drank more than I should on too little sleep, and did come back to my bar. And then instead of just going home, which I, possibly could have, I was very tired, and I went back in my office just to get away from the crowds that were outside, and I fell asleep while I was in my office. But I'm at that bar, 7 nights a week. If this was a recurring problem, I mean, the officers would know it because I interact with them multiple times all the time, every week. I mean, this was a one-off occasion, and I was angry at myself, angry at the patrons, angry on many things. That the one night that I actually did go out and try to have a night out is the night that something occurred.
Based on just what you were telling us about people on the tables and these fights and stuff, is there a pattern of over-serving, do you think?
No.
Sounds like there's a little bit of excess going on.
No, well, I'll describe what has occurred. In the last 6 months, since the Heidi bar closed, I have had an influx of a number of undesirable patrons. And quite frankly, in the last 6 months, I've been putting a lot of effort into weeding, undesirables out. And it has been a problem in the last 6 months. I mean, it's actually, that's why I'm down here 7 nights a week till bar time, every Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and oftentimes on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays as well. We've had an influx of people who just do not seem to understand how to behave when they're out. I don't know, who gets up on a table and thinks you can, people I've never seen before, all of a sudden are just behaving, just outlandish behavior. It's just, they're not patrons that I'm at all used to having in my bar. I mean, and it has been a problem the last 6 months. And actually, when the Heidi closed, I went out of my way to talk to my beat officers, really trying to invite them, please come in as often as you can, walk around my deck to make sure everyone out there sees the police present, that is, and actually, I think I've gotten the situation very much under control now. I mean, yes, we did have that incident. Again, it was that last fight where the girl broke the nose of the other one. You would be surprised how quickly these things go from nothing to just exploding.
Have you done any training with the bartenders to make sure that these get, the police get called quickly, or how to signal to get these things called in quicker? Because waiting 14 minutes is just it's a long time to let these things go on.
Yes. Well, actually, one of the things I do is I usually do have them call through I have found over time that using the Middleton non-emergency number actually works quicker than going through the 911. I mean, that's actually the number I have listed for my bartenders, to call when they, if something happens. And I've always had, like right here, I could even take a sign down.
Okay.
I mean, this right now I'm in my office at my bar. This is, I don't know if you can even see it.
Oh, good.
No,
Okay.
everything's reversed.
Okay. So they're trained and they know what to do. Yeah.
I have a list of you should be, call the police if this happens, call the police if this happens. And I implore them to, I was there, especially for the first incident, and I saw how fast it occurred. All of a sudden I was cleaning tables, and all of a sudden a girl was throwing glassware at my bartender because she wouldn't serve her. And what just happened,
Yeah.
And I think if you talk to my beat officers, they would tell you that I try very hard and I work very hard to interact with them and point out, and call them. And I want them to make their presence known, and I want, you know, my staff to quickly call the police. I mean, it is, I mean, like I said, in the last 3 months, I know we have called the police for things as insignificant as like a girl that I kicked out once before. I told her she couldn't come back in. Well, she came back in, and instead of like trying to do anything aggressive with her, the police just called, you know, my bartenders called the police right away on her, you know. I mean, they do these things, and they have, in these time frames of these 2 incidences, there are numerous calls that my bar has made to the police to try to deal with these situations.
Okay. Do you have security on staff, or do you rely on your bartenders to do that, or how do you?
The bartenders, you know, do rely. I don't have a devoted, you know, security. I quite frankly, if I could get more staff, I would have an extra bouncer, an extra bartender, but it's stunning the shortages right now. I mean, there are many nights right now, I am the cook. I'm in my office, and if I get, you know, I've actually cooked some food orders, you know, during some of your previous discussions, just because the staffing is just atrocious right now.
Okay.
I would put more people on every night of the week if I could find more qualified people.
Dan, Katie, Matt, Jeremy, anything else you'd like to add?
Just one question, one thing. There's one other thing that I'm a little concerned about, and that is the bartender had a knife. So from the sounds of it, it was one of those knives that you have clipped onto your pocket. Is that inaccurate? Because you said it wasn't pulled. That's a little concerning, because if things escalate as much as you do, as you said, or as quickly as you say, I'm not really sure that it's a great idea to have your bartenders having a knife on their pocket. It doesn't strike me as a prudent thing to be doing in the kind of business that you have.
Yeah, it definitely isn't. And when I realized he had that, I was not happy, and my discussions with my bartender were, you know, not very pleasant. I quite frankly couldn't believe that he had it, because he knew about the incident that had occurred with the pepper spray and how unhappy I was over that incident. I'm like, Willis, what are you doing? I was aghast that he had a knife, you know, on him, or especially displayed in his, you know, on the outside of his pocket. I never noticed. He has normally has a long shirt, and you don't see it.
So you've made it clear to your bartenders that's not acceptable behavior.
I thought, especially after I had, you know, moved out the bartender that used the pepper spray, that they knew that is, you know, I mean, I expect them to be defending themselves, but, you know, not to be using, you know, I guess not deadly weapons with pepper spray, but, you know, an aggressive weapon like that.
Just the opportunity to escalate a problem is just so high that we could have a disaster.
No, I agree there. And I had that discussion in February or in October, and I couldn't believe that he had, I guess he didn't brandish it, or I don't know if he said anything to the person, but no, it was, that discussion has definitely been had. And quite frankly, it's an individual who's rather small and diminutive in stature. And I think, you know, you're operating with some very deep-seated, you know, maybe insecurities that he has had over the years, you know, and that I didn't even realize that he carried a knife with him.
Katie, did you want to add something?
No, actually, Kathy, you asked my question about having extra security, like if you had a separate security staff, and I wasn't sure. I don't know the business well enough to know if that's required or not.
No, normally, you know, it's a pretty mellow, like even any of the nights that these events occurred, we were very mellow nights. It's just you get some bad eggs that come in oftentimes late at night after other bars will close, like at, you know, and then all of a sudden they rolled into my place and
so do some bars close before bar time?
Yes, a lot of times, sometimes we'll get people in from, I don't want to name any other names, but there are other bars that will close early, and then sometimes they come to my place because I'm one of the only people that's still open, you know. A big part of my
Is it worth it to you to close early?
A big part of my clientele are patrons from other, not patrons, but employees of other bars and restaurants. I get all the people that work in all the restaurants and bars that you might go to in Middleton. They get off of work at 10, 11, 12 at night. You know, it's like someone getting off of work at 5, PM, and they come to my place to relax. And, after they've worked all night long on a Friday, Saturday, Thursday, or weeknight, serving people. And I really feel I do a real service, for the people to relax after work. I mean, it may sound trite, but I really appreciate, or I know that they appreciate that I am open for them when they get off of work,
Jeremy, wasn't it that Heidi, they used to be open a little later, and then they found out that the clientele that came at that very end it wasn't worth it for them because of all the issues they were having, and they decided to cut back on their closing time a little earlier. Is that true?
Yeah. So that was after the shooting that occurred there. They were getting, some Madison bars were only staying open until midnight. Now this is kind of during like the higher end of COVID. So a lot of bars were closing early, and then they would get some of that clientele. It's not uncommon.
Okay. Yeah. Matt, Jeremy, anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think we've kind of heard kind of what we wanted to hear, just make sure, we've got an idea of what's going on. And
there were some concerns, and we really want to.
Right. I think they learned. I think in particular, as long as the one thing that jumped out at me was just the one night with, Mr. Lyshak being in the state described by the officer, but hopefully that's not just a one-time thing. But with the fights happening and then hearing that, you just want to make sure that the guy running the show is setting the example. But I'm as long as we never hear about that happening again, it doesn't sound like we will. It shouldn't be a problem again. And I think otherwise, what we've heard tonight, I think the kind of input we generally want to hear. So hopefully these are just, like you said, isolated incidents.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in. We appreciate that. It's
Thank you.
important to hear from you. Thank you. All right. That's the end of the agenda. Need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. I don't know what I did. Okay. Second.
All in favor.
Thank you all. Good night.
Aye. Bye. Thanks.